And not even half the population are ever going to give birth. 100% of the population are going to die. So it makes no sense to me that it's that way round. Like you say.
I just wanna see the same things you can see, understand the meaning on a new degree.
In this episode, I sit down to interview Emma from Dying to Help. And Emma and I have kind of known each other peripherally, follow each other on social media. We're both kind of in the same circles, but it was wonderful to sit down and chat with her. And she is just so bubbly and interesting and has so many different things going on. 100% like the best kind of person to show that being death positive, talking about death education, being a celebrant, being a doula, all of these things doesn't make you a depressed human being. It makes you cherish life, and you can see how like bubbly and excited she is about all the things that she has going on. So this was a great conversation. The interviews that I have done, I don't know, maybe I'm a bad interviewer. I do know how to interview, but I like being able to just jump into a conversation with somebody without a whole lot of prep work. This to me is more about just talking and seeing where the conversation goes rather than having bullet points to hit. But I still think we got some pretty interesting things in there. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. I know it's different than the conversations that have, been published up to this point, but it's a good thing to listen to other experienced death workers talk about these things as well. I think this is another aspect of what I want to do with Talking with Mortals, is be able to demonstrate what everyday death workers in all sorts of different branches of what that means are doing, and give you a flavor of what it's like to do this work and make it not so scary, because we are just people. So enjoy, do all of the things like follow, subscribe, share, send carrier pigeons, train slugs to send little coins to help support. I'm being weird now. Okay, enjoy.
Maybe that could happen when you're next to me. I just wanna see the same things you can see.
So much. Today I have Emma joining me. Emma and I are connected because we are both members of End of Life Doula UK.
Yeah.
But you do so much more than that. So, please feel free to introduce yourself, what it is that you do, and we can go from there.
Amazing. Yeah. So I run a community interest company called Dying to Help. So that's a not-for-profit or a social enterprise. And I set up Dying to Help. Originally, I was a funeral celebrant, independent funeral celebrant, and I kind of ran it under that banner. Then I realised I wanted to do a bit more than that. So I trained in end-of-life planning, and then eventually did my foundation course with End of Life Doula UK, or with Living Well, Dying Well, and then joined End of Life Doula UK. I'm doing my diploma at the moment, and I also do lots of death education events. So I run an online monthly death book club. I pop up at various places where anywhere that'll have me talking about death and dying, I will be there.
Fair enough. Yeah, same. Absolutely. Yeah, so you're kind of like the full package then. Do you tend to be a celebrant to people that you are a doula for, or is that kind of separate? How does that work?
Yeah, so I'll be anybody's celebrant. And but yeah, so far my doula work, it really started. I was also working as a chaplain in a care home up in Northumberland, and I did that for about 6 years. And so my kind of hands-on doula experience were before I did any of the official doula training, so to speak. And so that was the work that I did was doula work with residents who were nearing end of life, and then I would do vigil work sitting with them, and then often I would get the opportunity to lead their funeral as well. And for me, that whole package is wonderful because I get the time to spend getting to know a person. I get to kind of minister to them and their family and kind of be with through that journey. And then when I get to deliver a funeral ceremony, when I'm writing it, it's like writing it for a friend. It's someone that I've known and journeyed with. So most of
Mm,
my doula experience has been in that capacity. Um, I have done a little bit of doula work kind of since I've come out of that role, and have done a couple of funerals for people that I've done kind of light, what I would call light touch doula work with. So yeah, but most of it would be non people I haven't worked with on the doula side of things.
right. Wow. Okay. Yeah, I think most people, if they've had an experience of death, of a funeral, or not so much celebrants, I think that's a little bit different because celebrants take the time to get to know the family and the people. Um, but I've had the experience of going to a funeral and the minister mispronounced the person's name throughout the entire service. And if, if anything's going to take you out of saying goodbye in any sort of like sacred spiritual way, then that definitely will. So um, I can imagine just having worked with clients, being able to take that relationship all the way through to the end and being able to honor them in that way it must be amazing.
Absolutely. It is, although I will confess, I have done exactly the thing that you have said. That you,
Oh
yeah,
no.
and it only happened. No, it only happened to me once, and it was a resident from the care home, and I had known her for 2 years. I didn't mispronounce her name. Her son, who I had known for 2 years, his name was Neil, but it was spelled Niall. And even though I knew his name was Neil, because it was written as Niall in my script for the whole funeral, I called him Niall. He thought it was hilarious, and his mum would have thought it was hilarious as well. And I was just like, I can't believe I've done that. But no, you're right. It's the one thing that I say when I go and meet families. With the funeral work, I'll say, I'm going to ask you so many questions about your person who's died. And you might go, why are you asking those things? And I'm like, because I want to feel like I know the person. The greatest compliment I get as a celebrant is when someone comes out of the funeral and they'll go, I didn't know you knew them. And I'm like, I didn't. But I work really hard to make it sound like I did, because I've been to so many rubbish funerals. I think many of us have. And I want to kind of try and eradicate, that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to be fair, we all are human, and unfortunately, it is one of those situations where you get one shot, don't you? There's one
Yeah,
funeral, there's really not a lot you can do, so stuff happens.
it does. And
um,
it is as well how you style it out as well, but it is about, like you say, the more you know someone, the better a job you can do.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting to me how many people that I speak to that come to doing doula work specifically, um, that when you go through the training, you realize, oh, I've been doing this for a while now, actually, or there's so many elements of it that I have been doing just with my family or community. Um, and I really enjoy those people because I've come at it from a different point of view. It's not something that I've ever had the opportunity to do. Um,
Okay.
so it's interesting to learn of people that are kind of coming already from that community based, pathway.
I think that many more of us have the experience to draw from than maybe we think we do. I also think that the kind of the modern death machine and industry has taken a lot of that away. I used to call myself a progressive death worker until I realized that I'm not progressive at all. I'm regressive. I'm going back to the ways that things were, where you would have the person would die at home, they would be cared for by their family and by the woman in the village who would know what to do. And that's what I'm advocating for, kind of going back. Funeral professionals and the medical professionals we have, absolutely brilliant. But we don't have to fully rely on them, and they've kind of robbed us from some of that touch of death ourselves. And just as a human being, my kind of just experiencing being with someone as they die and experiencing caring for a body after someone has died, it is a deeply richly human experience, that I think everybody should have the opportunity to see and be part of. And I think that would take away an awful lot of fear. that we have about the unknown and about death, because it's only unknown because we don't get to see it. But actually, it's generally normal, natural, a process. And if people can just get that experience, they'd see it differently.
Yeah, I agree completely. And one of my biggest pet peeves is this whole like calling eco burials or natural burial grounds like new. No, that's not new. That's the way that we've kind of always done it. The
Yeah,
new is the
that's exactly
casket.
what we always did.
It's
Yeah.
not at all new. New is like, aquamation or, something
Yes.
like that. That's different. Um, but yeah, I agree completely. I think it does people a disservice to act as though death is something that is impossible for you to be with, to work
Yeah.
through, to confront. Um, and I think it just creates this perpetual like fear of, oh, I can't do that. That's too scary. It's too much.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it of course it is probably one of the most difficult things we'll ever go through, but I don't think you can fully go through it um, without confronting it or being with it fully.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. Yeah. It's that it's just recognizing that our bodies were made to die, and that it is natural and normal, um, and the body knows what it's doing, and often we just need to accompany that,
Mm,
and actually something I read just this morning was talking about how the interventions that we have at end of life are often more to make those of us left behind feel more comfortable, and because we witnessing a death can be overwhelming for us if we don't know what to expect. So we want interventions for our person, but actually, if we just allow the body to do its thing, we might need less interventions than we think. And I guess that's it it would very much depend, on the person who was dying and how their dying process was going and how comfortable they were with the whole idea of how this is being handled. But I think sometimes we need to kind of shift our focus from this is horrifying, and realize that actually, no, it's normal. What's horrifying for us who are not dying, who are not that person who's dying, is that we're going to be left without that person. It's the grief and the loss and the bereavement, but the actual death bit isn't that bad, or doesn't
mm,
have to be that
yeah, yeah, and I think there's a lot of fear that just comes from ignorance, just simply not knowing and understanding what that process looks like or never having been with it.
Yeah.
Um, Clearly, like some people have harder deaths than others.
Yes,
Um, the terminal agitation is one that I think even if you're prepared for
absolutely.
and you've seen it, it's still difficult to sit with. Um, but yeah, no, I agree. I think for me personally, it's been a major learning curve, because all of my experience with death has been sudden and unexpected. So I haven't
Okay.
had, I kind of call it the luxury, but it's really not in many ways. Um, the ability to see death coming in that way and be able to prepare. So that
Yeah.
has been for me a huge part of my learning as a doula, and what that looks like
And
and
I,
how to
and
be
I
with it.
think, yeah, I think, what you said about kind of the luxury, it's both sides have merit, so someone dying quickly and suddenly and not going through a prolonged period of what we would see as suffering and might well be suffering, well, that's a blessing for that person. Surely they didn't have to suffer, but it's a shock for them, for us, as they're wrenched from us so suddenly. And the other side, the time that we get to prepare, but someone knowing that they're dying and maybe having fear and maybe having pain and maybe having distress about that. So, but that's where I think with those deaths, those ones that are a bit more drawn out, that anything that isn't a sudden death, bring a doula into that space, even if it's just to ask the doula some questions, you know, even if it's you're not going to engage the doula for full services, but you just want to know what's going to happen next. So back end of last year, I get a text message off an old family friend, and I knew that her dad had been unwell for a number of years. And she just messaged and said, dad's just come home from hospital on end of life care. The palliative care team are coming. What happens now? And I said, right, okay, let's talk about this. How much do you want to know in this space? I will tell you things and you tell me if that's enough or you want to know a little bit more. And it was her biggest question and worry was for, like, she says, well, we're going to have carers come in a couple of times a day, or 3 or 4 times a day. But my mum's worried, what if dad dies in between that time? And to be able to explain to her that, her dad there was a well-known trajectory for this illness. He was on palliative care. He was at home. If the carers were there and they were coming back in 2 or 3 hours, it's highly unlikely that he's going to be fine in that visit and die suddenly in between. It's like you will
Mm.
see pattern, and the carers and the palliative care team will tell you. And and each day I was just checking in and I was like, how's his breathing, how's his circulation, is he communicating? And we were able to just map that normal death out. And she was like, to me, she said the biggest gift was knowing that she didn't have to worry that all of a sudden dad was going to drop down dead. They
Mm.
had this, and I was like, I can't promise that that's not going to happen. I don't know that he's not going to have a massive heart attack or something, but the normal natural process in this situation looks like this. And that, she said, was brilliant for her, just to kind of go, okay, I get it.
Yeah. No, what a wonderful thing to be able to give to your friend too. Like just being able to help out in that way. As you were saying that, it reminds me. So I'm not a mother. I don't have children, but I am so aware of the connection between like birth doulas and death doulas, and I always think about how horrific childbirth would be if nobody talked about it, if nobody warned you of like, okay, well, this is what's going to happen, and here are the next steps. And we're so educated, and even then, I don't think we're entirely that
Yeah,
educated until you get into the thick of it. Um, of the stages of birth and the stages of, well, first this will happen and then that. Um,
yeah.
no wonder we're scared of death because we don't have that literacy.
Exactly. And not even half the population are ever going to give birth. 100% of the population are going to die. So it makes no sense to me that it's that way round. Like you say, it's the analogy I use is we're afraid of death because we don't see it. It's like the bogeyman that's under the bed when the light's off and you're in bed on a nighttime. When you turn the light on, that bogeyman, that monster, is just a pile of dirty laundry. It's nothing to be scared of when the light's on. Death literacy, talking about death, having just these conversations turns the light on, and it makes you go, okay, I can see a bit more of that. It still looks like a scary monster, but I can see that it's just socks and pants. But it's in the shape of a scary monster, and we can slowly start to bring more of the socks and pants into the light. And
I
it
love
doesn't have to
that.
be as scary.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
really like
death's
that. I
just
really
socks and
like
pants.
that. I think that's the title of this episode. 100%. Yeah. Yeah, I mean there's so many different things that you encounter in life that are existentially terrifying, but we prepare for them and we
Yeah,
have systems around that. And I think that's what religion and spirituality used to offer, is a support system and a literacy with other people who had the same belief system. But now that that's not as common, then we're left floundering to come up with our own. Um, and who knows what that's going to look like for each individual, but then we don't have that shared awareness either.
yeah, and I absolutely agree. I do think though, so I am also an ordained minister in the Free Methodist Church,
Mm.
and I have a Christian faith, but the church is a bit rubbish about talking about death. We are great at talking about what happens after and encouraging people with that. But getting alongside someone who's actually, facing the reality of the death bit, still not so great. So yeah, the existential stuff, the what happens beyond, um, and even then, the church in general cannot be great at it. I do
Mm.
think that tapping into spirituality in its widest sense, we all have spirituality, regardless of whether we have faith or anything like that. Tapping into that, into the what makes me tick, how do I interact with people, how do I interact with the world around me, how do I interact with something beyond, tapping into those parts of us, um, and really getting to know ourselves in that space, I think can be a really good starting point as well for exploring some of these conversations. Because if you've never thought about anything beyond, you might never even thought about the ways you interact with the world around you. You might only ever have thought about yourself and how you interact with other people. Those are kind of the basics that you need in order to get through life. But if you've not started to think about bigger questions, then the idea of death or whatever happens beyond it, that's going to be terrifying. It's going to be like asking, a 4-year-old to do physics. Nobody should ever have to do physics, but do you know what
No.
I mean? It's like, yeah, it's just too big a leap. So it's about kind of starting small and this is like when I'm having conversations with people, sometimes the idea of a death conversation is too big. So we might just talk about what's your favorite music? What do you
Mm.
like? What are some of your favorite places? And then we can weave those things into why do they make you feel good? What is it about them that connects with you in a certain way? We then might take that down to, do you think that maybe towards the end of your life, if you were in bed and not able to get up and go to the beach, which is your favourite place, would it be nice if we brought the sounds and sights and smells of the beach into your room? Yeah,
Mm.
great. Then we can do that. And it's about taking that journey as slowly as it needs to be taken, which is why we should all be having these conversations from a really early age, as early as possible, especially, as at least as soon as we hit adult life. Even in teens, we can, approach some of these conversations in in the right way, and just kind of figure out what makes me tick, therefore, what's going to bring me comfort, and therefore, where do I think I might want to be, and where might my brain be taking me, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you just stole the question that I was going to ask you. It was as you were speaking, I was thinking, what age do you think we should be speaking about this? But like, yeah, I agree. I think um it's something that is worthy of being engaged in from a very early as, if you're starting to ask those questions, then you are age appropriate for whatever comes up.
Yes.
Um, and it needs the time to think about and to change and to morph as you grow.
Absolutely. And I'm a huge advocate for children at funerals, particularly if it's not the closest relative. So, if the very first funeral you ever go to is a parent or a grandparent you were very close to, that's going to hit really hard. But if you get to go to great Uncle Fred's funeral when you're 6, which I didn't get to go to when I was 6, and I'm not bitter about it at all, then, you know, that's my earliest memory of death, is knowing that my great uncle Fred had died and me saying, when's the funeral? And being told, you don't need to worry about that. That made no sense in my head because I knew there were funerals when people died. But so I'm an advocate for children at funerals, but I'm also an advocate for so obviously so the in the UK the curriculum's changing, isn't it? And they're bringing in bereavement and grief training into schools from an early age appropriate. That's brilliant. I'm working on a bit of a project that I'm hopefully going to roll out at some point. I've got a million projects, but with a local primary school, to talk about death and dying in age appropriate ways and to take them through a mock funeral. This is what happens at a funeral. This is what happens if you go to the crematorium and the curtains close. Granddad doesn't suddenly burst into flames, because I've had adults ask me that question. When I say, do you want the curtains to close? They'll say, well, I don't want to see the flames. no flames behind that curtain, you know, it's not fire retardant enough. That's definitely in another room. But there's no such thing as a stupid question. And adults feel like they're asking stupid questions because they feel like they should know. So let's get the kids
Yeah.
asking these questions. And it's just about making it as normal as possible. So you find a dead bird in the garden. What do you do? How do you use that? My friend's got cats and it's constantly catching voles. So they are constantly having little burials in their garden. And this is teaching the kids kind of, this is normal, this is natural, this is life, and this is death, you know, and
Mm,
it just normalizes stuff.
yeah. I'm imagining like a little mini cemetery of just nothing but little vole graves, like little headstones. Um, so I come from a very rural area in America where farming, like everybody was a farmer, everybody hunted. Um,
Yeah,
so again, it's also one of those almost like country living, city living comparisons that when you grow in the country, then you see dead animals and
yeah.
things get hit on the road, and it's just a part of life that I think you learn from a very, very early age. Um, yeah, it has. Have you ever had any interesting like child involvement in a funeral or a celebration of life or anything?
Yeah, I mean, I've had kids as young as 4 in a funeral. And in that one in particular, it was the little boy's mum that had died. And so I just asked that if I could meet with the little boy beforehand. And I told him exactly what was going to happen in the service. You know, and we just talked through about the fact that the coffin was going to come in and mum's body was going to be in that coffin, and it was going to go up onto a platform, and we were going to say some things about mum. We were going to listen to some music. And then at some point, there was going to be curtains that were going to close around mum's coffin. And it was, you know, it's just like saying goodnight at that point. Um, and I says,
Mm.
and you don't have to sit still and you don't have to be quiet. And this is what's happening. But this, you know, and I kind of checked in with the family beforehand, and that kid was ace through that. Um, with regards involvement, um, the most beautiful experience, and this was kind of what got me started in this world of death work. So my friend she had 5 children, and she had 8-year-old twins, and one of the twins had been unwell for a while, and we knew he was coming to the end of his life, Daniel. And when Daniel died, they asked me to do Daniel's eulogy. I don't have children either. I have a heck of a lot of surrogate children, and those kids were some of my kids. So I did Daniel's eulogy, and it was in a small rural church in Lancashire. Just family. Now they're from a massive family, so this small church was packed. And then he was getting buried in that churchyard, and then they were having a big celebration service in a bigger church in the city.
Mm.
So we did the eulogy, did the service, went to the graveside. Daniel was buried, and everyone goes off for refreshments in the hall and stuff. And I just noticed Daniel's brother Joel walking back over to the grave where the guy is just manually backfilling the grave. And I just like hung back just a little bit. But I thought, I'm just going to keep an eye. Don't want to worry any of the other adults. And Joel just went up to the gravedigger and went, "Can I do that?" And the gravedigger amazingly just handed him the shovel, and Joel just started shoveling the soil onto Daniel's coffin, going, "Bye bye, Daniel. Bye bye, Daniel."
Oh.
Joel knew what he needed. And I use their names because I've got permission, and I tell this story a lot because it was the most beautiful thing I have ever seen from a human being who had not yet been told what was supposed to happen at a funeral and what you weren't supposed to do. But he knew he needed to put that soil in his brother's grave. So he just did it. And actually, so he's like in his early 20s now. And I saw them a couple of months ago, and I was telling him this story. He has no recollection of it. It clearly wasn't that significant to him, or maybe it was at the time, but massively significant for me. And so yeah, that is just huge, absolutely huge. but allowing them to. The other thing I do, if I'm meeting a family and there's children, maybe it's grandchildren or whatever, I always tell families that I'm an advocate for children in funerals and that they don't have to sit still and be quiet. I also tell them that they know their children best. And if their children are not going to come to the funeral, can they draw a picture or write a letter to go with the coffin so that they feel they've had the opportunity to take part? Or at least give me their memories that they want seeing. But I just want kids to know that this really important, significant ceremony and ritual includes you, even if you can't be there, even if maybe you're given the choice and you don't want to be there, but it includes you because you're a part of that person's life and they were really important to you. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that is absolutely beautiful. And I think you touched on something that whether it's children or adults or whomever, knowing what you can do is so nobody tells you all the options that are available to you as somebody who has just lost a person. And one of the
Yeah,
things that comes to mind is like spending time with the body after they've died. People don't realize that you can do that, and I think it's such a critical part of the death
absolutely.
process to understand and start to like accept what's happened. God, what a
Yeah.
beautiful story. I totally understand why you tell that story because it's just I can see that. And even if he doesn't remember it, I'm sure it did something internally.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, just I think you are a death educator, so you understand how much of the work is just getting people to know what is possible.
Yeah. So I always say we don't know what we don't know. So we don't know to ask questions about it. So you meet me in the pub and I'm going to tell you something about death that you didn't know. I'm just going to drop these things in. And like, and if I'll go out with my mum sometimes. We were on holiday together in Spain a couple of years ago. And I've got a few tattoos, but I've got a tattoo here that says for death is not the end. And I'm sat in a bar on the beach in Spain, and this couple beside said, "Oh, what does your tattoo say?" So I tell them, and then I launch into why I've got it and what I do. And my mum's going, Emma, and I'm like, "Mum, they asked," and I'm like, that's I'm not going to stop because they but it's about reading the space and reading the room and reading the people. But yeah, there's not a day go by when I don't tell somebody something because you need to know. And what I found is so I've been kind of I started doing funerals 8 years ago, but I've been in this death care world for maybe 12, 15 years, kind of
Mhm.
subtly in the background. What I found is now I'm the one I'll wake up to a random WhatsApp from someone saying like, so when the Queen died, got a message off a friend, has she been embalmed? And I was like, so I just replied going, well, I wasn't there, but the fact that she's in a lead-lined casket, I expect she's probably been embalmed as well, or I'll just get texts with just a song and then they'll just put for my funeral, or just you get these questions, and then somebody else was like, will such and such just be bones now? And it's like, ask the questions. But when people know that you're happy to answer the questions, it's like, yeah, then they start asking and they'll do it on the sly. They won't necessarily start asking when there's other people around, but they'll drop you that message. I really want to know what happens when. I really want to
Yeah.
know, do I have to do this? And I'm like, great, I'll tell you. But people just need to know who to ask. That's why I
Yeah.
always talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a curse of the trade, honestly, is just you become that person. And I'm so
I
happy to
don't
be
think
that
it's a
person.
curse. Yeah, it's a blessing. It's an absolute blessing. I talk
Mm.
about it like forever and ever and ever.
Yeah. My go-to little tidbit, I need to make sure that I'm saying this right, is that in England, I don't think it's across the whole UK, but in England at least, that you can bury up to 3 or 4 people on your property. Yeah.
I think it's two.
So
I think it's
two,
two.
okay.
I'm not sure, but yeah, because I think after two, it becomes a. burial ground, and you have to register it as such. So you can still bury more, but you have to register it as a burial ground at that point. But yeah, I always tell people, did you know
Right.
you can be buried in your back garden if you own the land? My favourite one is
Yeah.
about burial at sea, because in England there are three places that are permanently licensed for burial at sea. Two of them are off the south coast, and one of them's in Tynemouth, which is like just over the river from me. And so many people
Mm,
here don't know. I live on the coast. Um, we've got a lot of families who have like maritime history, and I'm like, can you imagine if your granddad died and you had his funeral and you cremated him or whatever, or you buried him in the local cemetery, and you found out 2 weeks later that he could have been like literally tipped off the back of a boat in the North Sea? Like, how gutted would you be to know that that was an option? If you then go, granddad would have loved that. You need to know these things beforehand, and to know it's on your doorstep. So that's my kind
yeah.
of tidbit. But yeah, burial grounds in your garden and off the
Hmm.
boat in the North Sea.
Yeah. Yeah. There's always something like, and I think that also adds to it adds to the trauma. I say that with like a very like a small t. Um, because
Yeah,
the end of life we build up to be this massive moment, and you're still just living, so things can go wrong and
yeah,
things, might not go to plan. But as long as you have as much information as you can in order to do that well for the person and for the family, then I think you're removing a lot of that possible trauma that comes from regret afterwards.
yeah.
Yeah, it's always so unfortunate when you meet people like that, like you just said, that they'll find out like, oh, I didn't have to do it that way, or I could have done this, that would have been nice. And you can't
Yeah.
rewrite history, unfortunately. So,
No, and I always tell people, we do the best that we can with the information that we've got at the time. And the other thing is, if you've done dad's funeral, you've organised all of this, or supported dad at the end of his life, and then you're making decisions. Whatever decisions you're making are the right ones at that point, because it's the only decision that you can make. So it's the right decision, you know particularly if someone's not left any instructions and not had the conversation. When I was working in the care home, it was one of the conversations I had with every resident was their kind of their final wishes. What did they want to happen? And a lot of it was around the funeral, and so many of them would say, I'll let my daughter sort that out. So I would say, I call everyone Betty. I'd say, Betty, that's lovely that you're happy for your daughter to do whatever she wants. But when you die, I think your daughter's going to be really sad. And she's going to have all this other sadmin to do, all the sad admin that has to happen when you die. What if we just gave her some pointers? What if we put down some favourite music choices, whether you think you'd prefer to be buried or cremated, um, and and obviously being me, I'd tell them about all the other options as well. But they would generally, these are of a generation who it was burial or cremation, and we'll just put some guidance down, and then we can put at the bottom. Betty says she's really happy for her daughter to ignore all of this and do whatever she wants. But if she needs some guidance, these are some of the things Betty has said. Not a single resident said no when I said that to them. They were like, "Oh, yeah, let's do that."
hmm.
And it's just like just capturing bits of information, because you know what it's like when you're bereaved and your brain is doing its grief thing and it's gone into sludge, and you've got all of the practical things that have to be organized and paid for and sorted, thinking about mum's favorite song and what she might want to be wearing. Um those things can just fall out of your brain. You might not remember those things, but actually, those are the personal touches that you will beat yourself up about later. Even though
Hmm.
we tell you not to, so it's like, think about those things and write them down and make sure your family know where that document is, and update it for goodness sake. Because at the minute, my funeral plan says I want Dancing by Kylie Minogue to be played at my funeral, and I'm really hoping that I live long enough that I really don't want Dancing by Kylie Minogue at my funeral, that I've kind of chosen something else by then. So update your plans, every year, or just at least sign and date it to say it's still relevant.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely that's key, because I think mine. if I had done it when I first knew about advanced care planning, I always joke that it would have been something from like Green Day. And it's like, love Green Day still, not appropriate right now for who I am right now. Um, yeah.
And that's the key, what you've just said there, not appropriate for who you are right now. So that's the
Mm,
other thing I'll get from families. They'll go, "Oh, we thought about having this song, but it's not appropriate." And I'm like, who gets to say it's not appropriate? Absolutely. So I did a funeral on Christmas Eve for a lady, and when I went to meet her daughter, the music going in was the Birdie song. And I was like, "Are you sure?" And she was like, "Yes." She always played it, and the grandkids loved it. And so I just went, "Do you want me to do the Birdie dance going in?" And she was like, "Will you?" I was like, "Yeah." And that was, and that was right. So there's nothing that's not appropriate. The only caveat to that, I would say, is depending on the venue you're in. So if you're in a church, you're probably not gonna they're not gonna like you playing Smack My Bitch Up by the Prodigy. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's just, I mean, there's a lot worse that they probably wouldn't want you to play as well. But it's just thinking context. But yeah, I'm like, do whatever is right. I've done two funerals dressed as Elvis because that was right for the person.
wow.
And I'm like, yeah, that's not a problem. I have two red lines that I don't cross when it comes to funerals, and I tell everyone, you can have anything you want. I can do anything you want as long as it doesn't cross these two red lines. So I am a Christian and I am an ordained minister, and I won't do prayers and rituals from another religion. But I'll get someone in to do that bit if that's what you want. Not a problem. And secondly, I'm a
Mm,
Sunderland supporter, so I won't wear a Newcastle shirt, and that's it. That's my two red lines. So, and generally, because I work across the Northeast, it's brilliant because that one, the football one, gets the reaction either, "Oh, brilliant, you're on our side," or, "Oh my goodness, who have we picked?" And I'm like, I can't be perfect. But it's the banter, and that cuts the tension in the family consultation. And yeah, and it's like I've worn other football shirts before, and I've done a whole bunch of stuff. I've worn gold cowboy boots and done a line dance out of a funeral, because it mattered to that person, and their family felt it was the right thing. Great. And then sometimes I'll tell people these things and they'll go, "Oh no, we don't want you in fancy dress." And I'm like, "That's fine. I'm not going to rock up in fancy dress if that's not what's right for your mum." And you guys, these were two very specific occasions where they wanted Elvis, so I did it. So,
yeah.
that's it. It's like it's your service. And I never take away from the real gravity of the situation, that it is a ceremony and ritual, that as human beings we rely on ceremonies and rituals. It's why we have birthday cakes every year, isn't it? It's like we rely on these things to help us mark the pivotal moments in life. And so it is important that there is a ceremonial and a ritualistic aspect to this event. Um, but dressing as Elvis doesn't take away from that. It's like, I've always said I'm not going to just come and do stand up comedy. I'd be awful at it anyway. But it has to do the things it's meant to do. I always talk about the fact that the person has died in a funeral. I've been to many funerals where that's never been mentioned. And it just could be this is your life, but it doesn't talk
Mm,
that they're dead. I always do a bit about the fact that they're dead. I always do a bit about how do we move on from today with them not being in our lives. Because if we don't do that, then the funeral ritual hasn't done what we as the living need it to do in us. So yeah. Anyway, that was a waffle. Sorry,
yeah.
I went off on
No,
one
no, no. I love it.
there.
No, absolutely love it. No, because one of the main thing what I love about that is that one of the main things that got me thinking about being a doula was years ago. I've talked about this a lot, but I lost a friend. He was quite young. I think he was like early 30s. And it was a very aggressive cancer, but he had enough time to sort of put together his wishes. And his wish was that everybody come to his funeral dressed in fancy dress, as something that was like an inside joke between you and him. And it
Brilliant.
was the most ridiculous, beautiful, personal, wonderful funeral. And it was the first time that I went, "Oh, this is perfect. Like this is so him." And it just, yeah, I just have these visuals of like people crying in full fancy dress. Like I was dressed up like a cowboy because I'm American and cowboy. Um, People dressed up in like as the Beatles, as just, it was ridiculous but perfect. And that's what, opened my eyes to, okay, it doesn't always have to be a minister or a priest saying the name wrong and not even knowing who this human being was.
I, I encourage everyone to know that you don't have to use a minister, you don't have to use a celebrant, you don't have to use a funeral director. You can do this all yourself. These people
Mhm.
are here to help you. If a family wanted to do a service themselves but just wanted some support, then I'll do that. You don't have to have me as the person who is telling you everything that has to happen and leading it all from the front. If you need that, yes, I'll do it. But if you just need a bit of encouragement, or if you even just need me to say, you don't need me for this, you've got it, go on, go do it, then I'll do that. But yeah, this whole idea that, going back to what you said earlier about spending time with the body when someone's died, this idea that when someone dies, it's an emergency and we immediately need to ring a doctor and then we immediately need to ring a funeral director to take them away. It's like, no, we don't. If it's a normal, natural, expected death and it's happened at home, you don't need to ring anyone. You might want to ring the district nurse
Mm.
team or the palliative care team or whoever's been looking after you just to let them know. And they will pop in and they will come and verify the death, but you can keep your person. They don't have to go anywhere. They never have to go anywhere, in that first time period. And there are
Mm.
things available to help look after a body at home. And a really good funeral director will help you with that. Um, some of them it might be a shock, but to be able to just kind of talk about, I want to care for my person at home, maybe even just for the first couple of days, and then I want them to go into the care of a funeral director. But maybe I want to keep them at home for a week and then have a burial or whatever. These things can happen. They always did happen, and it's
Yeah.
like, and depending on the climate and the time of year, yes, we need to think about how we're going to care for that body and different things that are going to be happening in the body. But again, just to remember it's a process. So a bit of a pivot, but last year, it's not, it's the year before that. So just over 18 months ago, my dog died. And like I say, I don't have children. So Ronnie was the closest living thing. He was the only living being that was mine before he was anybody else's. We had a very, very close relationship. And I knew that I wanted Ronnie to die at home. And I wanted to keep him at home for a bit. So I had him at home for 2 weeks on end of life care. And basically, I just got to call the vet when it was time. I threw him a living funeral. We called it Ronnie's Grand Farewell, and everyone came and saw him in the garden and gave him a bit of steak and told them how much they loved him. And then on the day, the vet came and she gave him the lethal injection in my arms. Um, and I'm not stupid. I know what's going to happen. So I had him wrapped in a blanket, but I put a puppy pad around his bottom first because bodies leak. These things happen when someone dies, and with a small animal, it's going to happen. He wasn't a big dog. Um, that's that's my Ronnie there on there.
Oh.
um, and I kept him at home, and I had him beside me in bed that night. And I actually live with my parents, and I had him beside me in bed until about 3 o'clock in the morning when my mum came in and said, Emery's starting to smell. And it was August, and it was a warm day, and he was a small being. So I took him out into the garden at that point. Um, but just that is something that can be done. If you can go, actually, I want to experience being with something as it dies and being with a dead body. Well, then if you've got a pet, you
Mhm.
can do that as a gentle introduction. Um, to how this stuff works and to see what happens. And then, if you've got services around you who are going to support you and help you, or people, then that's great. So my vet was brilliant. We've got another dog as well. So and I've been back in, and and she just talks about how wonderful it was that she knew I kept him at home for a night and stuff. And then actually he's gone to be with someone who's a bone artist, and I'm getting his bones back. So that's what I'm so yeah, they're not quite ready. So and essentially it's part of this whole it's okay to decay, and part of my death education work, that I'll have Ronnie's bones and I'll go, this is the normal natural process of what happens after someone dies. And yes, his has been sped up ever so slightly, but it's, it's all been done in a very, very natural way. And it's different, and I know it's not for everybody, but again, talking about that, people go, I didn't know I could do that. If I'd known, I would have done that with my dog or my cat or whatever. And I'm like, I didn't know. I just knew I wanted it, and then I found someone. But
Wow.
yeah, it's, and I get, yeah, it is a bit weird. But it's right for me.
Yeah, no, see, it's so funny. I'm actually coming up to a year anniversary. So I lost my soul cat a year ago, so I resonate a lot with what you just said.
Yeah,
Um, and it I was very deliberate about the experience with her because it was my partner's first experience of losing a pet. So I wanted to make sure that it was as thoughtful as it could be. So yeah, I doulaed the hell out of all
yeah,
of that. Um, but my
yeah,
previous experiences of having to put a cat down were not good. And it just I was aware of what I was able to do, and it was wonderful in that respect. But I had not come across the idea of being able to like keep the bones until honestly it was maybe like 9 months ago or something. And I'm still not sure that I would want to personally, but
yeah,
I love that it's an option. I've even seen people like doing the pelts, so you can keep the pelt,
yeah,
the
yeah,
fur. Like I kept whiskers. I've got, her ashes in a little urn around my neck.
yeah.
So yeah, it's whatever works for you, but it's understanding what the options are before you get to that point and you're
That's it.
working out of
Yeah,
some like, addled space. But yeah,
yeah,
how cool. I know I completely agree with you. And I think most people's first experience with death, and it is a different kind of death than with a human because it's such a pure relationship. It's such a dependent relationship. Your whole life sort of revolves around caring for them. Um, but I've always kind of wondered if parents, consciously or not, use pets as a way to teach about death. And if that's something that we could move closer towards in terms of like
absolutely.
creating death literacy, not just a goldfish, but something bigger.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think that goes back to, your rural upbringing and everyone being on a farm and everyone, and animals and stuff like that. So I've got friends who live on a farm, and, and they see that natural process of birth and that natural process of death and everything in between. For those of us who live in more urban environments and, haven't got like a herd of cattle or a flock of sheep just there, but we all, we tend to have pets, and, or someone in the family or a neighbor will have an animal that they care for. And and it can be so, again, for so many kids, it's their first experience of a bereavement and a loss. So how we tend that, how we prepare them for the death, which we can't always do, we don't always see it. So I knew Ronnie was unwell, and I knew, and I had him at the vets, and we worked out that what we were going to do, and I was going to have time with him. Sometimes we don't. Animals are amazing creatures, but they can hide things, and it might just be an instant decision. This animal now needs to be put to sleep or whatever. Um, but having those conversations, particularly as pets get older, we can start talking about, what will happen next at some point, and talking about what would make it right for the child. Like, how can the child be involved in a way? Again, the idea of drawing pictures and sending letters with a coffin. What would be right for the child? And is your small animal, if it's small enough, is it gonna be buried in your garden, or are you gonna have it cremated, or is it just going to be flushed down the toilet if it's a goldfish, or or whatever? What's right for the child, and how can you create some kind of gentle ritual in that? And there's oodles of resources on the internet. The internet's
Mhm.
got everything. Just have a look, or reach out to your local doula. We will all give you some guidance on how to do something, or what to start to think about when creating a ritual that is right for you and your dying thing,
Mm.
person, whatever. That's, we love talking about this stuff. Ask us.
If you had a magic wand that could just change something about our culture, whether it's Western or just UK or whatever, in terms of our relationships with death and dying, or even ritual or whatever. You have a magic wand and you've just waved it. What has just changed?
Everyone dies at home and everyone sees that dead body. With whatever interventions are needed, but everyone sees that person's body, and it become, just to go back in time, take us back in time. I love that we've got the healthcare system we've got, but it's taken us, it's making us live too long often in an undignified ways, and it sees death as failure. So yeah, I would go back to where death is not failure, it's normal and natural, and everyone sees the dead body at home. So a lot
Easy.
of people are not gonna like that. Yeah. That's, yeah, most people will go, I don't want to do that. I don't want to see that. And I'm like, it's
Mm,
because you haven't. It's because you haven't seen it.
yeah. I mean, you don't really have to go back all that far for that to have been the norm. I mean, it's only a few
Yeah,
generations, so that wand
exactly.
isn't working too hard, really.
No, it's not. Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay. Thank you so, so much. It was absolutely wonderful to speak to you. Please let me know what's going on with all of your other projects. I love the
Will do.
idea of going into a primary school and just showing that. So when that happens, if that happens, please let me know. But yeah,
Absolutely.
thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Baby, I just like to talk with you. I just wanna go out